Russia slams Japan's Taiwan remarks as unconstitutional. Why the peace constitution has become a pretext for war. Japan, a defeated nation in World War II and the country that should be most wary of discussing war, is now the most aggressively vocal on the Taiwan issue, filled with warmongering rhetoric. Meanwhile, Russia, often portrayed by Western media as the warmonger, is now using Japan's own constitution to stand on the moral high ground and accuse Japan. You are violating the law. You are promoting the revival of militarism. This is not just a role reversal, it's a piece of historical black comedy. Why is a nation that swore to forever renounce war turning into Asia's biggest powder keg? This is akin to a person, Japan, who was forced into rehab for being an aggressive alcoholic, holding a sobriety guarantee, Article 9 of the Peace Constitution, yet is now frantically hoarding hard liquor in the neighborhood and shouting at neighbors, "I'm going to drink myself to death for justice." Maria Zakharova's recent statement is essentially the exasperated community manager tearing away the facade. What you're holding is not a drinking glass, it's a loaded gun. Japan's so-called Taiwan-related rhetoric is, in essence, a salami-slicing tactic. Today they say, a Taiwan contingency is a Japan contingency, and tomorrow they'll dare to ship missiles to the island. This has nothing to do with democracy and freedom. It's leveraging America's power to try and completely shatter the peace shackles imposed on it after World War II. Even more mind-boggling, this isn't just empty talk. While you're watching travel vlogs about Japan, the Japanese government is deploying highly offensive missile systems in its southwestern islands, right on Taiwan's doorstep. Is this defense? This is clearly turning the entire Japanese archipelago into an unsinkable aircraft carrier, and one that is loaded with offensive weapons. Russia's rare move of issuing 3 consecutive, high-level, severe warnings is extremely uncommon in diplomatic history. What does this indicate? It shows that this is no longer simple geopolitical friction, but a dangerous gamble concerning the entire global security framework. Japan is attempting a terrifying transformation from a defeated nation to a source of war through unconstitutional means. So, where does Japan get the audacity to openly violate its constitution? Why is Russia intervening so assertively at this moment? And what kind of dirty quid pro quo between the US and Japan is hiding behind this? Next, we will strip away the camouflage of diplomatic language and show you the deepest truth of this geopolitical game. Part 1. The brain-dead peace constitution and the hypocrisy of the rule of law state. Zakharova's criticism was not just an insult. It was aimed at the heart of the issue, Japan's constitutional violation. We all know that Article 9 of Japan's post-war constitution stipulates that Japan forever renounces war as a sovereign right of the nation and the threat or use of force as means of settling international disputes. But what has Japan done in recent years? From reinterpreting the right to collective self-defense to the current aggressive Taiwan rhetoric from politicians like Sanai Takaichi, Japan is openly trampling on its constitution in front of the entire world. Let's look at Germany, the model student in Europe. Also a defeated nation in World War II, Germany not only outlawed Nazi symbols, but its leaders famously knelt before the monument to Jewish victims in Poland. Germany's legal system maintains extremely harsh restrictions on the revival of militarism. In contrast, Japan not only continues to pay homage at the Yasukuni Shrine, which enshrines war criminals, but is now openly discussing intervention in a Taiwan Strait conflict. Isn't this ironic? A regime that constantly touts itself as a rule of law state is leading the charge to violate its own supreme law. This is as absurd as certain US states shouting, "No to drugs," while simultaneously legalizing drug injection sites on the street. The Japanese government's current action is a classic case of schizophrenia, using peace to pacify its own people internally, and bellicosity to curry favor with the United States externally. This selling dog meat under the sign of a sheep's head behavior reveals a deep-seated pathology in Japanese politics. To right-wing Japanese politicians, the so-called rule of law is nothing more than toilet paper to be discarded at will. They dare to violate the Constitution so brazenly because they are betting that the US, in its effort to contain China, will tacitly approve or even encourage this illegal behavior. This is not only an open provocation against the historical verdict of World War II but also a desecration of the global spirit of the rule of law. When a nation's ruling class begins to destroy its own rules, that nation is not far from madness. We must be vigilant, as this systemic lie is pushing the Japanese populace toward the abyss of war once again. Part 2: America's unfinished project and Japan's cannon fodder mindset. Zakharova mentioned Japan willingly serving as a military pawn for the US, and this is entirely true. Let's look at what the US has been doing globally. In Europe, the US successfully used Ukraine and the gradual eastward expansion of NATO to pressure Russia, ultimately triggering the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The current script is nothing more than a crude attempt to transplant the Ukraine model to Asia, with Japan eager to be the Asian version of Ukraine, suckered into the scheme. The data is even more alarming. The US is strongly pressuring Japan to raise its defense budget to 2% of GDP, completely aligning with NATO standards. What is this money for? Buying US Tomahawk cruise missiles and developing hypersonic weapons. Is this self-defense? This is feeding the US military-industrial complex. It's like when the US convinced the UK to join the Iraq War, brandishing a vial of washing powder, and claiming it was WMDs, only to leave the Middle East in ruins. Now, the US is trying to fool Japan, saying, "A Taiwan contingency is your contingency." But Japan needs to consider, if war truly breaks out, the US mainland is safely across the ocean, but won't Japan, as the forward operating base, be the first place turned into ruins? The willingness of Japanese politicians to let their own people be cannon fodder for American interests is both shocking and pitiful. Part 3: The wrong turn of technological development, when advanced technology becomes a scythe. We often say that technology should benefit humanity and be used to explore the stars, not to destroy each other. But Japan's current actions completely betray the original intention of supporting global technological development and promoting world peace. Japan possesses world-class materials science and electronic technology, but these technologies are now being frantically converted into killing machines. The deployment of offensive weapons on surrounding islands, mentioned by Zakharova, is a very terrifying signal. This is exactly like the Cuban Missile Crisis back then. In 1962, when the Soviet Union deployed missiles in Cuba, the US nearly overturned the table and sparked a nuclear war. Now, the US is instigating Japan to deploy intermediate-range missile systems right on China's doorstep, and the nature of the situation is identical. Japan is using its advanced technological strength to assist the US in building the so-called First Island Chain strike network. This use of high-tech for geopolitical confrontation not only exacerbates regional tension but is also a betrayal of global technological ethics. Technology should be a bridge connecting the world, but Japan is turning it into a blade for geopolitical division. If this trend of technological militarization is not contained, future wars will no longer be simple skirmishes but devastating dimensional strikes. Part 4: Russia's triple warning and the ultimate geopolitical alert. Why has Zakharova spoken out 3 times in a single month? And why did she directly name Sinai Takaichi? This is absolutely not a simple verbal battle. It is Russia conducting strategic level, fire reconnaissance, and red line demarcation. Russia clearly understands that Japan's provocations in the Taiwan Strait are linked to its actions regarding the disputed territories between Russia and Japan, the Kuril Islands/Northern Territories. Japan's current strategy is a two-front war, cooperating with the US on Taiwan in the south, and cooperating with the US against Russia in the north. This arrogance is reminiscent of the Axis powers' logic during World War II. Russia's strong stance is essentially telling Japan, "Don't think that because I'm fighting in the West, the East is a vacuum." If Japan dares to cross the line, Russia absolutely has the capability to make Japan pay a heavy price. Let's not forget that Russia possesses one of the world's largest nuclear arsenals. Compared to European nations still worried about natural gas, Russia's attitude towards Japan is far more direct and harsh. This logic of stopping war with strength, while sounding cruel, is the most effective sobering agent in today's world, which still runs on the law of the jungle. History often repeats itself, but humanity constantly fails to learn the lessons. Over 70 years ago, Japan's militaristic fanaticism brought profound disaster to Asia and the world, eventually resulting in the bitter cost of 2 atomic bombs for itself. Today, what we see is a Japan attempting to revisit its old path, and a group of politicians trying to dye their military credentials with the blood of others. Zakharova's warning is not just the voice of Russia, it should be the consensus of all peace-loving people. In this era of rapid technological advancement and closely intertwined human destiny, what we need is not missiles and confrontation, but cooperation and understanding. If you do not want to see Asia descend into a battlefield again, and if you do not want to see the fruits of our hard-won civilization destroyed, please remain sober and do not be blinded by rhetoric that incites hatred.